And we are now live.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Hello, everybody. Welcome and thanks so much for joining us. This is with the Community Action Partnerships of Sonoma County. Today we're going to have a community conversation on race, specifically about the LGBTQ plus experience as it pertains to Sonoma County and as it pertains to this beautifully diverse group of panelists I'm so honored to learn from today. So I'll sort of kick it off by introducing myself. My name is Spencer Blank. I'm a new resident of Sonoma County. I moved up during the pandemic, actually from San Francisco. And so I haven't even learned all of the facets of the county and how inclusivity works here or does not. So I'm on a learning journey with you all today as well. I define myself as a white cisgendered gay male, which I realize at many food chains, I'm at the top of the pyramid. And so it is so much my responsibility to shut up and listen. So I'm going to do exactly that and kick it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. Grace, why don't you start?
Thanks, just making sure my mic's done. Hi, everyone, welcome. My name is Grace Villafuerte. Quick bio is I was born and raised in Santa Rosa. My parents immigrated here from the Philippines in 1973. And I always say I spent most of my childhood at the Filipino Center, which was a strong place of support and sense of community for my family. Currently, I'm a social worker, and I've worked in social services in our county for the past 30 years, as well as sat on the board for various homeless nonprofits. Currently, I've been on the board for Face to Face for the past 6 years, which is a nonprofit that's provided HIV services and prevention in Sonoma County for the past 38 years. And currently, I'm also on the board for Sonoma County Pride and have been committed to community work here in our county all my life. And I identify as a lesbian. Next.
Awesome. Jimauri, how about you?
Hello, everyone. I am Jimauri. I'm 27. I am a full-time student at Sonoma State. I am from Texas, born and raised. I identify as a queer Black male. My pronouns are he and him. I have lived in Sonoma County since 2017. I enjoy being active in the Black and people of color communities here, as well as the LGBTQ community, which is amazing. And that's me.
Great, thanks for that intro. Angie, how about we hear from you?
Hi, everybody. I'm Angie Dillon-Shore. My pronouns are she, her. I'm 58. I'm a cisgender female. Lived in Guerneville, lived in Sonoma County and completely in Guerneville for 17 years with my wife, Nancy. We have a 31-year-old son and a 5-year-old grandson. I've been ED, the executive director for First Five Sonoma County for 5 years, but most of my career experience prior to that was in the nonprofit sector and not really necessarily focused on early childhood. I did live in the city for a while in San Francisco and did a lot of work with homeless youth, queer youth, in HIV prevention. So that's all I'll say for now.
Amazing. Thanks for that, Angie. And last and certainly not least, Kayatta, let's hear from you.
My name is Kayatta Patton. I identify, my pronouns, working on that. She, they, them, her, K. I'm a Black queer female educator, poet, thinker, truth seeker. Been working in youth development probably for the last 15 years. A heavy presence in the Sonoma County hip hop community. Also the POC community out in Sonoma County. I've been there for the past 7.5 years. So that is home, born and raised in Oakland. I think that's it for now.
Thank you for that. One of the main themes of this chat today too is around intersectionality, which is a term specifically owned by so many marginalized communities and identities that we're going to talk about. You can see all of our panelists have so many micro identities within, you know, a grander scope that makes them who they are. So on that note, talking about your coming out experiences or not coming out experiences. I mean, I'm of the mind that you come out for the first time and then you come out every day, you know, after that point. And in every interaction, you have a choice of whether to reveal your full authentic self or not. Why don't we start with Angie? You have such an interesting coming out experience too, of just when to inhabit your full self and how it's changed through life and how you view yourself today.
Sure. So when I was a teenager in the 70s, I think maybe I'm the only one of us that can say that. This was in the urban Midwest. I grew up in Indiana. I definitely knew I was a lesbian inside my own head, but the concept that I could actually live as an out lesbian was just not a thought that ever formed in my head until I was in my early 30s. And although I wasn't aware that I was doing it at the time, I think in reflection, and this opportunity has really given me the chance to kind of think back and reflect on this, I put a ton of energy into making sure that I passed as really heterosexual. I went to Catholic school. We actually lived across the street from the nuns who taught in my school, most of whom I really loved and admired, and who were actually, some of them were living closeted lives as nuns. So those were really my first queer icons, right? Sister Ellen and Sister Caroline. But anyway, it wasn't until long after that I had moved to the West Coast. I'd been married to a man for 10 years. Was raising a son. And then as we went through a divorce in my early 30s, I then became really self-aware of how being queer on the inside and not on the outside had a lot to do with my discontent in that marriage and just feeling a life unlived. And so I kind of came barreling out of that marriage and that closeted existence with the feeling like I had so much catching up to do. Like I had missed out on a lot. And so over a period of a few years, I rejected aspects of myself that I have since reclaimed because I had cultivated straightness so much. Like I cut off all my hair, I started wearing flannel, read a lot of books about lesbian feminism. But then I met my wife in 2002. And so I would say over 20 years, I do feel that I've come back full circle, kind of back to my true queer self internally and externally, but it's been a journey.
I feel so many stories of that. We only have an hour. I could go on. Does anybody else want to talk about any themes in your own coming out story or where you're at today that you want to share?
I think for me, you know, just especially in the Black community, it's a little bit taboo. So for me, when I came out to my auntie instead of my mom, instead of my dad, just because I thought she would receive it better. Like I needed to put my foot in the water before I let everything out of the bag. And, you know, I have a son and, you know, I was with his dad for years, but I don't think I completely dismissed guys. But, you know, back to my coming out story, I told my auntie and she says, well, why didn't you tell your mom? And I was like, I'm afraid. And she was like, well, how would you be afraid? Like your mom is like, she's gonna love you no matter what. And a couple of weeks after that, I got enough courage to tell my mom. And she says, well, why were you afraid to tell me? I was like, just thought you would be disappointed with me. She was like, I've done so much crap in my life. I've done so many drugs and I'm not perfect. You know, I'm not in a position to judge anyone. And so, you know, my uncle was gay. And so we had a lot of practice, if that makes sense, in my family. He, you know, everybody just loved him. He passed away from HIV, from AIDS back in 95. But I think that just prepared my family to receive me in that way. It took a while for me to get comfortable inside of my skin about that too. And that's related to all the different communities I belong to, hip hop, Black community, I mean, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're going to dig deeper into that soon.
Yeah.
Grace or Jimauri, do you want to add anything of?
Yeah, so as a Black queer man, I was actually raised by lesbians. So I never even really had like a coming out story except for to my father, who just assumed when I was younger that I was heterosexual and would be with a woman. And I wasn't really too comfortable with expressing myself as being queer in Texas. Also, because my siblings are also gay and lesbian. And I just didn't want to be like, oh, it's a whole gay family, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But being down in the South, I definitely saw how the community and individuals within that community and within my own community, the Black community, would reject gay, lesbian individuals, family or not, children or not. I was absolutely blessed to have parents that were open and that accept my sexuality today. And me and all of my siblings are out. I will absolutely say that this California environment and the way that LGBTQ groups are treated here and the rights and the way that the community responds is what I've dreamed of my whole life. And I'm definitely glad to be here.
I remember from my days in Texas, I learned the higher the hair, the closer to Jesus. I don't know that you could tease that hair that high to ever be close enough, right?
I like that.
Grace,
Yeah,
you want to share being
Sure.
such a native of the region
Definitely.
here with such deep cultural roots in the Philippines and all of that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's funny because I strongly born and raised here and committed to this community, but I went to San Diego State for a few years and came out at 21. I was there for college. And I wonder sometimes if I hadn't left town, even just for a few years, if my coming out would have looked different or if I had stayed closeted or something. But I came out to myself when I was 21 years old. And I've always, so that would have been, I'm 46 now. So this was the late 90s. And I've always said that I was glad that I came out during discrimination because I had to go to events or LGBT specific areas like bars to be out, which means I got to experience a more intergenerational community, a more cohesive, united community, in my opinion. And I came out during Ellen's coming out episode, during Matthew Shepard's murder, and I felt the excitement of being on the precipice of a huge change in the LGBT climate in our country. And I feel grateful and lucky that I still have the kinship with this same community in Sonoma County that was there when I came out. And I'm still close with the mentors I had 25 years ago. And being 46, I feel like I'm now in the sandwich generation. My role in community, as well as my family, is to help and support both generations above and below me. And I don't know about the past, but I feel like our generations are so much more different from one another, because of changes that we've had and experiences and things like that. I relate more to the generation before me, to be honest. And because of differences in perspectives and experience, some of us are single, some of us have kids, some of us are married legally or not. Our culture, our income, the words and vocabulary that we use, which we talked about, it affects our communication with each other within our community. And I just focus on this because I strive to create space for all our community. So it's something that, I love talking about, even though it can be a difficult conversation. That said, I feel like I've only had that coming out moment with a few people in my life. And people are surprised to hear that for me, there's no big coming out because culturally, I say that we are still don't ask, don't tell. But I also feel like we've kind of followed the wave of acceptance in our country. That said, I definitely appreciate folks who may be a little more right-leaning or more, I don't want to say homophobic, but less open, and who take that journey to be more accepting, people in my culture, for example, to be accepting and open. And even if they can never say more than like, oh, that's Grace's friend or roommate, but wholeheartedly accept my partners, I appreciate that journey, because that's a hard, long journey versus folks who maybe grew up very liberal and progressive and then say they support gay marriage. And that's wonderful, obviously, but it's a easier journey, I just want to say.
Mm-hmm.
That's all.
And I mean, you represent so much of the opening of the floodgates of inclusivity. And also what we talked so much about on our call last week was how the nuances within the community are actually very divisive, or can be, that there's some actions and some words have traveled so far in our world to connect the dots and to really open some inclusivity. But there's that old adage of hurt people, right? That we all have this deep connection to our own difficulties in coming out, and maybe even project those onto others. So Kayatta, you said this amazing thing last week that I want to bring back up, of marginalized communities marginalizing each other. It just, I have chills even saying it again. Can you tell me a little bit?
Yeah, I think it falls under the lines of what you just said: hurt people, like oppress people, oppress other people. It's like fascinating. And Grace, I wanted to say I appreciate what you said about your family and this don't ask, don't tell kind of jam of, listen, okay, you didn't say that was my girlfriend, you didn't say that was my partner, but you did welcome her into your home, you fed her, you gave her love, because it's a hard journey for them too, right? But this idea of marginalized communities marginalizing one another, and I've experienced that just being a Black woman, being queer. When you talk about marginalized groups, you're talking about disabled, queer, women, Filipino, Black, Hispanic, you name it. And within those communities, there's this division. Like, I'm gonna hurt you because we've been hurt. Well, I don't want to feel oppressed like you. I'm above you and you're down here. It fascinates me because I feel like in America, there's this undertone of, listen, if you're not white, you're over here. You're going to remain on the fringes. You can't come into this particular fabric, right? And so that's kind of what I've experienced. And there's plenty of stories to like connect to that, but that's kind of what I meant by that comment.
And while we're on that subject too, we talked a lot about intersectionality. Can you sort of flesh out what that actually means to people?
I feel I'm gonna give you a good example. Like I have a friend. She's a white woman, and we're really good friends. And her mom was on drugs, and my mom was on drugs. And so when we have these conversations that go back and forth about race, she thinks we're aligned because her mom was on drugs. She had a hard life. My mom was on drugs. I had a hard life. Nah, our stories are not the same. We could swap war stories. I'm Black. That separates me from your group already. Do you know what I'm saying? And so we have to understand, even though we fall into these subcategories with one another, we also have to separate and recognize each other's truths, right? And not always say, and here's the other thing, people feel like they always got to talk or say something. It's okay to listen. And it's okay not to have the answers. And it's okay not to know. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Does anybody else want to jump into that, about just talking about all of these things of the definitions of what make us who we are, of you're witnessing marginalized communities marginalizing another, either here or elsewhere in your lives?
I'll jump in. I'll definitely say I've experienced that hurt people hurting people in the marginalized community, marginalizing each other. And I do see it as a societal issue here in the United States, because it's like Kayatta said, once people identify as being in this marginalized community, they feel like they have to compete in some kind of oppression Olympics, or even feel the need to try to understand my struggle, which I'm really happy that you're trying to, but to say that you identify with that, for example, one thing that I have noticed is that even within the LGBTQ community, a lot of the white gay people don't think that they can express racism. They don't think that they can express internalized homophobia or toxic masculinity. And Spencer, what you said at the beginning of this conversation about how you come out once and then you come out every day since then, it's literally been that kind of struggle, and it hits you even harder when it's someone from your own community that asks you, like, what's going on? Are you this? And then once you are honest with them and living your truth, you experience the discrimination, that marginalization. They feel the need to oppress you, essentially. And that's what I think we need to focus on, intersectionalities more as LGBTQ people, and do realize that people of color that are experiencing also struggles with their sexual identity, gender identity, even able and disabled status, like those all factor into what makes each individual themselves. And ultimately, the LGBTQ community can't have this blanket inclusiveness that I've noticed here in the Bay Area, because we all do have those different intersectionalities that should be, also acknowledged, and not just our sexuality. Yeah.
Because our all of these experiences sort of create hyper perceptive receptors, for lack of a better word, in us, that you are anticipating the worst, and when even an inch of that goes toward it, it still hits in the same place in you as discrimination, anything in that bucket. Grace or Angie, do you want to jump in too, and maybe even add in a layer of generational, of as queers age? Is this more pronounced? Is it less pronounced? Is it just about the same? Is it specific to the individual?
I think it's more pronounced in a generational way for older queer people. I mean, when we moved up here, our friends in the city were like, oh, you're moving to Guerneville where the gays go to die, right? Like, why would you leave this city? This is the beginning of the end for you guys. This is for the old gay people, right? And that was very much around a stereotypical gay white man with the means to move out of the city and move up to the river, right? I didn't really understand what that meant. But as I look back over the last 17 years, I mean, certainly I've experienced marginalization as a queer woman, for sure. But even more than that, I've experienced the security of, my income, my privilege in whiteness, and my ability to pass as straight, right? Which has helped me in my career. People assume I'm straight. And so that sense of being able to kind of hunker down in the lower Russian River area and just kind of go unnoticed, like my life has been, I kept it very separate. And this digging in marginalizes others. And I know there's harm in that, and failure to create a broader community and lift up marginalized people in the queer community. And like when Kayatta said on the prep call that you lived in Guerneville for 5 years, and I was like, what? I never ran into you here. And as I reflected on that in the last couple of days, I was like, yeah, that is a reflection of my digging in and just staying in a comfortable, white, upper middle class space. I don't have to broaden my horizons. And that's a real, that's harm. That's a hard.
That's the work, though. That is
the
exactly
work.
where the work begins.
Totally.
Absolutely. Grace,
Yeah.
do you have anything to add to of your own experience?
Absolutely. Kat, I like what you said about well, just I don't know if you were saying this, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that when marginalized communities are assumed to be given a voice or given a token voice, I think that within the community, oftentimes people will take the lead and say, my voice is what should be highlighted. And I think that in all these communities, LGBT, people of color, women, I feel like there's still a higher value placed on folks who have letters after their name or have a higher income. And I think that still highlights. And then I still feel like there's definitely still a feeling of other and not feeling seen within our LGBT community. I've spoken with other people of color and questioned what their experiences were, because I was feeling very, very confused if my experience was authentic within some of the meetings I was having. And there's always a moment when I ask this one-on-one, when defenses are dropped and there's a mutual, yes, can we please talk about that? And it's kind of when women give knowing looks to each other when men are dominating airtime. And I've also spoken with people of color in our community who've said they came to learn on their own that they never related to or experienced many issues facing other people of color due to their higher education and income status they were raised in, which is problematic when we're highlighting some voices as a blanket voice when looking upon them as representatives of the marginalized community because they share the same skin color. And in LGBT meetings that have a variety of representatives, I've heard the perspective from gay white men saying they can relate to the experiences of people of color and as well should take a leadership role because they can relate to the experiences because of their own experiences being discriminated as a gay person. And comparing experiences and trying to relate to other people and then offering solutions or leadership is problematic because it reinforces that white savior belief in action, which is also a very masculine approach as well. And it's unfortunate because I think in a lot of our cultures where we do this, our culture is actually more based on community. And then so it becomes this more Americanization of our cultures and our community in a way where it's less equal, I guess, where we're not giving voice to older adults, for example, or folks from other incomes, et cetera, et cetera. And, and for myself too, as someone who helps plan LGBT social events, even as a person of color, I still fail at creating events that promote inclusivity based on comments from people saying they don't feel welcome. And I need to learn for myself to reach out and listen and observe and learn what's my part in contributing to a more inclusive environment. And maybe first that just starts with, again, listen and don't respond. I think that we're so intent on responding and reacting or saying, oh, I learned this today. And it's like, nobody can learn anything from one workshop or one event or one book or one friend or even 10 books or 10 friends. I've lived this life for 46 years and I'm still learning what it means to be in my culture as an LGBT person, et cetera, et cetera. So there's it's problematic.
To say the least. But there's something in there about realizing, and there was such a big theme in our last conversation too, was about the listening and then the listening more and then the listening even more, that the work never really ends. And as soon as it does, you're trapped in the bubble of like what we talked about, fake liberalism or wokeism. And I sort of want to talk about that now. This is a perfect segue into our next area of conversation, is specifically about Sonoma County, where we generally pride ourselves on being this very liberal, woke community that accepts everyone just as they are, and we treat the land well, and we cultivate it, and we share it with everyone, and the quality of life is beautiful, and everything's lovely. I think I'm going to start with Jimauri here. Can you just talk a little bit about your experience in inclusivity or not here? And I also want to plant the seed in everybody too. We had a question come in, a really good one from Facebook here, about the agricultural community and the racism, bigotry, discrimination, all of these things embedded within just as almost core cultural values of what keeps that community upright. and maybe how that manifests in the greater society. So Jimauri, you know, as a transplant from Texas, and specifically even Dallas, right? You're
Yes.
from the Dallas area. Yeah. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So my experience with the LGBTQ plus community here in Sonoma County, AKA the Bay Area in general, because I do love going down to San Francisco, Berkeley, and Oakland to experience the melding pot of individuals there. But I have also observed and noticed that the LGBTQ plus community here in Sonoma County slash almost all of California is very, very much focused on not necessarily stepping out of their socioeconomic diversity bubble that they have set up for themselves and engaging with other groups of individuals that have different intersectionalities. For example, the LGBTQ clubs at SRJC having joint meetings with the student clubs of color from MECHA, the Latinx community, Asian, and the Black communities are all wonderful experiences that I didn't get to experience growing up. I was part of that generation where technology was just advancing, apps were advancing, social media, and that was how I was reaching out to all different types of individuals, both rural and in the city, to understand their experience and to kind of see how the LGBTQ community just how it was differently, because I experienced my own little LGBTQ community growing up. It was a bubble, being raised by not only two women in Texas, but they were also an interracial couple. So we were also dealing with the racism when my stepmother would take us out and individuals would walk up to her and ask her why she was with us. And I haven't really experienced that level of hate here and discrimination, but the discrimination that I have experienced here in Sonoma County has just taken me aback. And that's kind of shocking, and also why I'm single. So
and looking or not looking?
Oh, always, yes, and dating.
Snatch this amazingly in touch individual up, everyone. Kayatta, you talked about fear and ignorance driving so many things of how we treat one another and how we sort of segment our own population, our own marginalized community. Do you have any thoughts on, you know, how that has manifested in Sonoma County?
I think I'll just piggyback off of what Jimauri was saying. Like, you know, we're in California. If you're queer, you feel safe here for the most part. You know, we have a large community here that's really supportive in California in general. If I'm talking about Sonoma County in the LGBTQIA community, I can't say that I've ever experienced racism or discrimination, but I don't know if I've ever felt very welcomed, if that makes sense. I always kind of felt like outside on the fringes. Most of my friends are heterosexual, and that's interesting to me because in the Bay, I don't think it would be set up that way. Like, I moved to Sonoma County from Sacramento, and I always had a community to be a part of, and I never felt like I wasn't welcomed. So I don't know if I've had any breakthroughs in regards to the LGBT community in Sonoma County. It's a great community. I've just never felt the warmness or the welcoming vibes that I've received elsewhere. I can't tell you why that is.
Mhm.
I'm just telling you how I feel as a human being in my own personal truth.
I appreciate that.
Mhm.
Angie, I think you wanted to come in here with something.
Yeah, I've thought about a lot about those things that you said, similar comments on the prep call, Kayatta, and then both Jimauri and Grace were talking about, we talked a lot about kind of how individually what we can do to try to be more inclusive just as individuals, or even in our kind of local activism work. Some of us are involved in that. But in my mind, I just feel like with everything in Sonoma County right now, that feels very entrenched, as far as just entrenched oppressive structures, that the way forward really has to be about just dismantling overarching oppressive power structures. I think Grace brought up philanthropy, and that was very triggering for me. I was like, yeah, because that touches into my work a lot, and just the frustration with who is controlling wealth in our county, right? And it feels to me, if we can address those structures, kind of who is making big decisions for our county and our community, who's making the big decisions, who determines where resources go, that then we'll see these issues around homophobia and racism and the intersections of lack of inclusivity. Those things then have the opportunity to flow and open more easily. I mean, it feels really weighted by classism and intractable and widening separation of class, which is obviously intersects with race in our county, huge.
Well, and we're having this humongous leadership shakeup and reckoning in every single community. Me in Windsor, obviously, everybody's heard about what's been going on in Windsor, and we are not remotely the only ones experiencing a real awakening, a final, completely overdue awakening. Grace, you've been so connected to it. Do you want to talk a little bit too about the structures?
Yeah, Angie, I like that you brought that up. It's true. I think that we who've been here a while recognize, and maybe either we accept it or don't accept it, or we fight against it, but it is what it is. There has been this culture of, we know where the funding is going to go in this community. We know what voices will be highlighted again. And you know, that like, for me, I mean, I love my community, all its faults and everything. I recognize it. And when I see faults, I want to try to fix them, or that sort of a thing. That said, I believe the issues in our community, our larger community, as well as our LGBT community, remain the same issues in the larger community. Certain marginalized communities are still very invisible. I'm tired of hearing people say there's no LGBT people of color in Sonoma County except for so-and-so and so-and-so, and then they still name, everybody always names the same 5 to 10 people of color as our token folks. I used to make a joke about being a token, being like, I join a meeting. We all know when we go to a meeting in Sonoma County, it's primarily less people of color. And I used to say I covered a lot of bases. I was the token Asian American, woman, and LGBT person. So I covered a lot of, I fulfilled a lot of their quota. And I think for me, that was just my way of coping, maybe. I don't know, because I'm coming to terms with that now, and I'm exploring that now. And I used to be able to compartmentalize my various identities, and in this past year, with all the Asian American violence happening and me participating in some of the rallies, for me, I couldn't compartmentalize that. I had to come out as myself, in the sense that I had to, like, just for myself, I think that there's always been violence, that literally that is not new. Asian American violence is not new. We've all been called all the names since grade school. And we're able to say this, but because of what was happening this past year, it was much more highlighted. And so it was really interesting seeing people get upset about Asian American violence, have the rallies, etc. And it was, for me, I would observe which rallies I felt the most comfortable at, or where I felt like I was there to heal myself and gather with my community, versus I'm here to show up and teach people, you know what I mean? And it's a very different vibe, who's putting on the rally and what the intent is. And I think that Kayatta, you were talking about, feeling welcome or warm, and that feeling. And I think that one thing I always come down to for so many things in my life, representation means everything. So if you don't see yourself or things that represent you in a group or in a meeting or in a Zoom or whatever, I'm going to filter myself a bit. I'm going to feel a certain way. I'm going to feel either open or not open. And I think that I don't have an answer per se. I hope we're starting to work on things. I think we are. And I think that with all movements in America and the world, when there's progress, there's going to be pushback. And so I think we just have to recognize that. But I think I do hope that for once we address this properly, in the sense that folks who are amazing leaders in our community, maybe it's time for them to say, okay, does my voice need to be heard right now? Do I need to step back and keep learning? And that was the whole, like, when people say, what can I do? What action can I take? If you don't have an answer for yourself, don't take any action, in my opinion. You haven't learned, because, this person they're going to come to this action for themselves, and this person's going to come to this action for themselves. And there's no one answer. You're going to have to, in my opinion, come to that on your own. But you're only going to come to that on your own if you put yourself in situations or go to events that you've never been to before. Not to learn, not to react, not to say, oh, this is what I learned, but just to be there and absorb, because you're not learning if you're always thinking about what your output's going to be.
I love that.
Love that. Now, getting even more specific, we've touched on this throughout the call, but the exact action steps and the exact, I'd also love to hear even more about the nitty gritty of the community involvement each of you have in Sonoma County, as well as the, along the lines of moving this conversation forward, of the actual action steps, whether knowing that change happens only from within. You can't affect anybody else but yourself. What is something that you've worked on to get to this point and to continue on in your journey? And what are some of the things that you would love for others, maybe those of us on this call, maybe those of us who are white, cisgendered, and male, who to shut up and listen more? What are some of those things that we can really put into play in our lives, as based on your experiences, your community involvement, which spans the whole county? Don't everybody jump at once.
Well, I would definitely say, everyone has pretty much said it, but I cannot stress it enough. And it's absolutely something that I have observed here in Sonoma County, is representation does matter 100%. And like Spencer said, there are several communities throughout Sonoma County that are being shaken up right now by LGBTQ people, people of color. They're finding their voices and they're expressing that. As I look through the previous leadership in Sonoma County, I'm noticing a lot of not diversity going on in the leadership, and definitely not representation of the overall communities that are here in Sonoma County. So that led me to start Black Equity and Equality Coalition here in Sonoma County. And it's basically a Black founded organization. I'm the president. I get Black individuals connected with anti-racism resources, housing resources, basically any kind of help that they could need, as well as getting them connected with the community, whether that be their intersectionalities of being LGBTQ or just being people of color, or even being an ally that's white, that's wanting to get involved in anti-racism and what the people of color experience is here in Sonoma County. And I think that all of that work is very important. And I can admit I didn't always pay attention to that, but once I actually had the time, and it was actually after George Floyd happened, to really pay attention and see what was happening in Sonoma County and to see who was representing me in my community. I lived in Roanoke Park at the time, and they just made history by electing Jackie Elward as vice mayor. She's a Congolese and immigrant from Africa and a strong Black woman, and has definitely opened up doors in this community and just started conversations that need to happen as far as what the LGBTQ community and people of color have in common and what their goals are ultimately, which is to have representation. That's definitely what my goal is.
Another question, while I kick it to somebody else here, another question that came in on Facebook was also, what role do you think interfaith communities and faith, organizations around the community could or should play in our sort of collective awakening?
Are you talking about like church?
Yeah, church groups.
I gotta speak to this one. Because I love going to church. Like, most of what I do is God-centered. And I think I've had a difficult time. I found a place of worship here in Santa Rosa. I'm not going to really get into that and say where I was worshiping. And it did a lot for me in regards to just like my faith and my life. But ultimately, when it boiled down to everything, I was like, yo, I don't know if I could truly be myself here. That really messed me up, because I build relationships there. I have friendships there. I worship there. I have fellowship there. So if you're talking about interfaith, it's creating, we've been talking about this word inclusive, this whole conversation. God, I don't know who your God is. We're not going to get into that. There's so many names, nicknames, sub names, stage names for God. But at the end of the day is love. My God knew me before I even came out the womb. So for me, like, you're just a teacher, minister. You don't get to decide this. You know what I mean? If we're talking about these churches and places of worship, if you really want to understand what you could do, really unpack that word inclusive. It's not conditional. You can't put conditions on inclusivity. I'm sorry. I was getting, it was like touching my spirit about that. But I feel like when people say, I have unconditional love for you, what does that mean? I'm going to love you no matter what. Period. So when they talk about Jesus, when they talk about God, they say, yo, this guy, this thing, this entity has unconditional love for you. So who are you? It's also having these unconditional relationships. What is that? I'm not about to put conditions on this. Oh, you're in love with a woman. Oh, you're trans. Oh, you're bi. Oh, you can't come here now. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I like what you said. I as far as Sonoma County goes and interfaith in churches, I want to say even from the very first Pride marches, and get-togethers in the 90s and probably before that, I feel like churches in our community have dominated the entries in pride parades, and still do, I think. Maybe not dominated anymore, but I feel like churches have had a very strong presence in pride parades, some of them obviously. And then for myself, raised Catholic, I'm Filipino. And so I definitely, it's only in the last few years that I definitely started to delve more into that. I mean, Kayatta, like you said, I have a great relationship with God, with my God. Church is a business, in my opinion. It's not religion and it's not faith. And it's a wonderful place to worship. I'm not taking that away,
Right.
but it doesn't, I don't need that for my, Annandale State Park, I say, is my church. That said, I really came to appreciate, after a lot of conversations with various people, to recognize that for myself, I strongly walk the Jesus path. That's my goal in life, and that's outside of religion. That has nothing to do with Catholicism, to be honest with you. Walking the Jesus path to me means being in service to others, living in community. And so I look at folks who make sure they go to church every day and then do shady stuff throughout the week and then judge me. And I'm like, I am walking the Jesus path compared, are you? How's your relationship going? Just because you go to, you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I mean, I have no, I was going to say, I don't have any beef with churches, but it really is unfortunate when folks find a place of worship, create a very strong sense of community and family, and for various reasons end up having to leave, like get a divorce, not just because of LGBT issues, but lots of issues. And it's very unfortunate that a place of worship can be not inclusive, but I don't know. I think that's a longer conversation.
And they make the active
It's a loaded,
choice.
that's a loaded conversation.
Yeah.
Like we couldn't do it in one sitting.
I just want to touch on what Kayatta said.
What else?
I have experienced the actual discrimination in Texas from churches, from people in my family that are uber religious, that would tell me as a child that my parents and gay people were abominations and would literally go to hell. My mama has never expressed anything to me but unconditional love. And that's all that I know how to give. So when I experience and see the churches out here participating in LGBTQ events and coming around, honestly, it makes me feel a little bit uncomfortable just because I grew up Southern Methodist. 100%, my whole family is involved in the church, and I identify as spiritual. And I can definitely say that the experience that I have gotten from not only just Black religious buildings, because that's what a church is, ultimately a building, and the people that work there, that is their jobs. The discrimination that they have towards LGBTQ people is not unconditional. They want conditions. They want you to be heterosexual. They want you to reproduce. They want you to act manly and produce toxic masculinity to any women, not just your spouses, daughters, everyone. And that's just an observation that I have as an individual with the religious community from these two different geographic places in this country.
So even just looking at the love and openness and in true inclusivity of this group here, I think about one of my favorite Buddhist sayings that is no mud, no lotus. That there's almost something tied to the fact that we've known the storm to fully appreciate the sunshine. Does anybody have any thoughts on the struggle you've been, the struggle you've endured and experienced, and how that allows you to embrace the world and your fellow human in a whole different way?
Am I talking too much? Can I talk again?
Please.
Please.
About 10 years ago, I had a neighbor. His name was Cleveland. Cleveland was a cool dude. We would hang out, you know, kind of like parking lot pimp or whatever. Just kind of hang out, shoot the breeze, conversate. And one day he hit me with this quote, and he was like, you know, if you can't be who you are, you don't exist. And I took that thing and I just put it in my bag. And I take it with me wherever I go. If you can't be exactly who you are, then you don't exist. It's like what Angie was saying, like she was living in this life for years and years, and she didn't truly feel like the full essence of herself until she was living her truth. So if I could give any advice to anyone, is if you can't be who you are, you don't exist. So live your truth, whatever that truth is. Yeah.
We only have 5 minutes to go. Does anyone else want to sort of give any parting advice? Let's say somebody's on this call and any one of their identities, be it queer, person of color, disabled to some variety, struggling with their families, with their religion, some piece of them that is not allowing them to be who they are. What advice do you might have for them?
I would say that you're definitely not alone. And ultimately, that's what I think people really empathize and recognize with, is that, you know, I feel like I'm going through this struggle alone. I feel like I can't express myself, who I am. And ultimately, there's people out there that are going through it and have gone through it and that want to support you. It's so easy to say, be yourself, live your truth, come out of the closet. But I've literally seen like groups of guys that would probably beat the crap out of one another for like even expressing any kind of homosexual actions. And
That's real.
at the end of the day, it's not just you. I think that where we're at today in 2021 is the most accepting and nice people across all generations, elderly, younger than me, people my age. People are being more accepting. So I think that if you remember at the end of the day that there's more of us out there that have unconditional love, that will support you, that will be part of your community, than there are those that will discriminate, we can all progress without those regressions and going back into the cycle of hate that has caused marginalized communities to marginalize each other. Like, that's where we're at.
Mm-hmm.
I would say, for somebody struggling, I would say find one person that's safe. That might be a friend or even not a friend. There's organizations where if you need to talk with somebody, find one person who's safe, because that's number one, that you can just say you're struggling. You don't have to have any answers at all about what's going, your identity or anything like that. There's no timeline or anything like that. But just finding somebody that you can say the words out loud and express yourself is such a relief, and it's so healing, and the answers often will come in that conversation. And it's going to be a long journey, but expressing yourself, whatever that journey ends up being, is so important to getting to where your truth is. But find somebody who's safe.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Angie, I want to come to you one last time.
Yeah, really same, like find those people that really see you, that see who you truly are, and that lift you up and have your back, and surround yourself with those kinds of people. Don't waste, life is short, so don't waste time, getting involved with dealing with haters and arguing online with, hateful people. Don't waste time appeasing people. Like, surround yourself with people who love you and see you unconditionally.
I was going to say one more thing that I've heard from a lot of folks who give advice to other folks who are thinking about coming out, that whomever you lose in your life because of who you are, there is a huge community waiting in line to welcome you and give you a big hug and
Truth.
have these conversations with you.
Sometimes you got to shed somebody in your journey to really finding yourself.
Someone, yeah.
Oh boy. Well, you all have taught me so much. You have filled me. I'm positive everybody who's joined us feels the same. We had some more questions that came in throughout, and I know we couldn't answer them all, but hopefully we'll get this exact panel of amazingly intelligent, wise, smart, and intensely thoughtful human beings back together to continue these conversations. And we hope that you all pick up these difficult conversations in your own life and you question what is and why it is and what you can be doing in your own life to be the change that you wish to see in the world. So thank you all and have a great night. And thank you all hugely to our panelists for leading this.
Thank you for having us, Cap
Thank you.
Sonoma.
Everybody that was on the panel, you guys are dope. Thank you guys for inspiring me. Jimauri, keep doing your thing. Grace, Angie, you guys are dope. Thank you so much, Spencer. And thank you. Thank you. Community conversations.
I love it.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.